The holiday season is upon us, and with the holidays tend to come a lot of thoughts and feelings about family, how to navigate expectations, how to navigate disappointments. We have a lot of feelings, right? And so I wanted to spend a podcast episode talking all about this and maybe bringing some ideas or some concepts that would be supportive for you in finding a little bit more space and graciousness during this time of the year. So let's get into it. But before I do that, I have a couple of things I want to share with you. Number one, if you missed it, my ebook, Reclaiming Worth, is now available for you to download. You can go to thaissky.com/worth or go to the show notes or down below if you're watching this on YouTube to get this free resource guide to support you in navigating the worthiness wound. Now, the worthiness wound, the sense of there's something really broken within me, right? I'm too much, I'm not enough, and I don't know how to navigate the ways in which I feel like I have to prove myself to the world, or I feel worthless, I feel insignificant, I feel invisible. The worthiness wound can be absolutely debilitating and influence the ways in which we go into relationships, the way we see ourselves, the way we navigate families. And so I wanted to create this resource guide for you to give you some ideas of how to think about the worthiness wound and some ideas for how we can begin to address and tend to it. So you can go check it out. Again, it's thaissky.com/worth. I'm also creating a book club, a gathering of like-minded humans who want to talk about the worthiness wound, who want to answer or ask me questions. I'm happy to answer questions about the worthiness wound. I'm really excited for this book club. I'm excited to get to be in space with all of you as we think about how do we navigate this really tender space within us. So when you go to sign up to get the ebook, you'll learn more about that book club. Okay. Now, number two, today, December 17th, my free year in review is officially available to download. If you're new to my community, every year I release a free review, a free year in review to support you in reviewing your past year before setting sights on the new year. I deeply believe in the power of the review. I deeply believe in the impact that the review can have in creating a more intentional and thoughtful new year. And so I create this, it's like 60 some pages PDF filled with prompts, meditation rituals to support you in reviewing your year as a gift to you. Thank you for being here, for being a part of my community, for commenting, sharing, liking, for giving me feedback, for telling me when something isn't working. I'm so endlessly appreciative of you. And so I create this year in review as a thank you for being here. So you can grab that free resource at thaissky.com/review, or again, you can check it out down below. Or in the show notes. And for the first time ever, I'm creating a writing group, a 90-minute virtual opportunity for us to gather and complete parts of the review together. I know it's really, really hard to carve time during the holidays for self-care and for something like the review. And so I'm hoping that by putting something in your calendar and joining us live, we'll have an opportunity to dedicate even just a little bit of time in support of you reviewing your year so that you can create something really beautiful and profound for yourself for the new year. So when you go to sign up to get my year in review, again, thaissky.com/review, you'll get access to register for the writing group. Okay. So you got the Reclaiming Worth and book club, and you have the year in review and the writing group. There's so many opportunities to be together during this time. And I'm really, really looking forward to connecting with you. You're welcome to reach out if you have any questions. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about why family dynamics can be so particularly difficult during the holiday season. Also, hi, I'm Thaís. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. I'm so thrilled that you're here. This time of the year is difficult for most of us. I have not encountered, honestly, a single human who is not having some kind of a hard time during the holiday season. And I think yes, there are cultural pressures and expectations of how this holidays season should look. It doesn't help, right? That like the media, movies, TV, there's such an emphasis on finding the love of your life if you're single, or going back home for the holidays and having this wonderful, heartwarming time, that it can feel really particularly painful then when we're not having that experience, when the holidays is actually bringing up a lot of feelings of loneliness and isolation, a sense that there's something really wrong or missing in our lives. We can then start to feel very envious of other people that we imagine are having a much easier time. So there's like a cultural phenomenon here. There's a lot of expectation, a lot of pressure that we're supposed to be having or feeling some type of way towards our family and having some type of experience with them. And that makes it then much harder, I think, in some ways for us to really face the difficulties that many of us have in our family systems, because there's also then this level of shame. Like, I'm having a hard time and I shouldn't be having a hard time. I should be having an easier time with this. And look at how other people are having such an easier time. And look how everyone is experiencing the gift giving process is so joyful, and they're not in touch with at all that, they don't have the finances to buy the things that they want, or they're having a hard time knowing what to get other people, or like they're just having an easier time of it. And I'm the only one feeling this way. And there's then something really problematic or shameful or wrong about feeling this way. And so I just want to name off the bat that most of us are having this experience. And it may be to varying degrees and it may be in different ways, but you're definitely not alone in having a hard time navigating the holidays, particularly around family, even if, by the way, you have decided to cut certain family members off or cut your whole family off, right? Like maybe you're dedicating this time of the year to your chosen family, to your friends, to your partner, to your children, like the families that you've chosen, as opposed to your blood family. And there's sometimes a fantasy then that that's supposed to make it all easier. But it's hard to cut family members off. It doesn't, just because we've cut them off outside of us doesn't mean that we've cut them off internally, right? We may still then be grappling with the repercussions of cutting certain members off. And so it doesn't necessarily make the holiday season an easier time. In fact, people that I work with who have cut off parents, for example, will name how much the holidays brings up a sense of longing, a sense of loss, missing, right? They're missing their parents. And even though they know that it's probably for the best that they don't have a relationship with their parents, it doesn't make the mourning and the loss of it really real and really alive this time of the year. And it's also hard to navigate families during the holiday season because our families have essentially installed the buttons that they are now pressing, right? Like this time of the year can be very triggering because we are surrounding ourselves with family dynamics, with family members that bring out the worst in us. And then we feel really, really a lot of self-loathing for not wanting to be this way. How often have we, let's say, gone back home and find ourselves, even though we are steeped in adulthood, right? We're in our 30s, we're in our 40s, we're even in our, we're in adulthood. We go visit our parents and we're finding ourselves slamming doors or giving the silent treatment, or kind of cutting people off. Like we're doing things that we don't now do in our other family or other friendship circles, and we're doing it to our parents. What is going on there? Sometimes it can be helpful to name that as a regression, that we regress back to younger states when we surround ourselves with certain people. And that's information for us about what may be going on and needing to be addressed inside of ourselves for why we are regressing. But there's also something to be said that for many of us, regression is quite normal when we find ourselves going back to family, going back to friends that we haven't seen since high school, for example. We may find ourselves now acting like we're back in high school. There's something that can be quite fun about it, like reliving the good old days or kind of bringing back up this young, vital part of ourselves. But then there's also ways in which it can feel really shameful or really embarrassing or just like not who we really want to be. We're not proud of the fact that we are yelling or that we are, avoiding or that we're not standing up for ourselves, right? And we may feel then a lot of shame, like does it mean that all this work that I've been doing in therapy, does it mean that, we're not, it doesn't count in some ways? And, I don't think that that's true. I think that we can be doing a lot of good work, and then find ourselves going back to our, hometown and, reverting back to some old behaviors. It doesn't mean that there's anything maybe kind of not working in your therapy. However, it is an opportunity for us to learn a little bit more, because when we regress or when we get triggered, right? When things kind of start to get stirred back up, things that maybe haven't gotten stirred up in a long time, we now have an opportunity to face it, to hold it, to navigate it, to give it some attention and try to understand ourselves a little bit more in a way that could be really meaningful. Like, why is it that when you hang out with this particular friend, you revert back to being a 13-year-old? Like, what is going on in that relationship? What may be going on for you? What are you wanting to get in touch with? Or what have you kind of lost sight of that this relationship is bringing back up, right? So there's a lot of opportunity during the holidays and during family time for us to learn more about ourselves. We can learn more about what exactly triggers us or what exactly activates us or what do certain relationships bring up within us. Sometimes we can't really know things until they get stirred up. I see this a lot when I work with people who are single and they have spent, let's say, a year being really single and learning more about themselves, and they're really taking that year to understand something of themselves and why they're single and what's hard about relationships, and they're doing really wonderful, fruitful work. And then they decide they want to go back to dating, and they go back to dating. They find themselves in a relationship, and all of the old things that they thought they had addressed in that year of being single now come back up. What is going on there? I don't think that it means that they didn't use their year in a fruitful way. I don't think it means that they're not ready to be in a relationship. I think sometimes we don't know where our buttons are until they're being pressed, right? Sometimes we just don't know what gets activated until the activation is alive within us. And now that we are in a relationship, we now have an opportunity to address what's getting stirred up in a different way, in a way that maybe we couldn't when we were just an observer or we were just thinking about the past. But I think that there's a way that we put so much at stake during the holidays. It's like we're somehow putting this pressure on ourselves that if we were truly happy, if we had truly good relationships with our families, with our children, with our partner, then the holiday season would go a certain way. And if the holidays are not going the way that we had wanted to, it means that, it means something about ourselves, or it means something about the quality of our relationships. And that then puts so much at stake, so much pressure, to have things go smoothly or have things go a certain way. But I think what's more accurate to say is that the holidays are going to bring up all sorts of feelings because we're putting a lot of pressure on family. We're putting a lot of pressure on having these kind of experiences. And when we put so much pressure on something, we kind of eliminate the space for other feelings to come up. For example, we have so much pressure that we have a really good Christmas filled with really good gifts. For example, right? That we bought really incredibly thoughtful gifts, that everybody loves the gifts that we got. We put so much pressure on ourselves to kind of know people's minds and to know what they wanted, that we then don't leave any space, for example, us to have complicated feelings about buying certain gifts for certain individuals, or we don't leave space for us to really think about whether we even want to participate in a gift exchange, or we kind of don't leave enough room for us to be sad about the fact that there are people that we don't know enough to buy really thoughtful gifts for, or whatever, a myriad of other experiences that we may be having. And the importance of giving ourselves space to have those feelings is that then we can face ourselves and face our relationships with a bit more honesty. And this leads me to my next point. One of the concepts that really I really resonated with, that really created a lot of space for me to think about some things differently, is this idea of relentless hope. And it's this concept written by psychoanalyst Martha Stark. And she talks about the ways in which we relentlessly hope that somehow, if we do something slightly different, if we modify ourselves in a slightly different way, or if we simply try harder, or if we bend ourselves or contort ourselves enough, we will finally get what we want from the people we love. We can relentlessly hope that this time our mother will get us the right gift. This time our dad is not going to make a racist comment. This time we're going to go home for the holidays and it's going to be really, really a beautiful, wonderful coming together. This relentless hope drives us towards ignoring certain things within ourselves, ignoring certain thoughts and feelings that we're having, and not really facing the reality of the relationship, all because we earnestly, genuinely hope and believe that if we just deny or avoid or pretend and really focus on what we want, we are going to get it. Now, I'm going to read to you a little bit of this chapter on relentless hope from the words of Martha Stark herself. Because she puts it really beautifully. So she writes, a young child needs the experience of being cherished in a non-demanding, lovingly accepting fashion by a mother who is emotionally present and empathically attuned. At least for a while, the child needs the experience of being the center of someone else's world, of having her every need, her every gesture recognized and responded to. If the child is denied such an experience, the need for a good mother becomes reinforced and intensified over time. Unable to confront the truth about just how unavailable her mother really is, the child defends herself against the pain of her disappointment by taking the burden of the mother's badness upon herself. By so doing, she creates a distorted sense of herself as bad. But it does also enable her to hold on to her illusion of the mother as good and as ultimately forthcoming if she, the child, could but get it right, okay? So the child defends herself against facing her pain. It hurts too much to acknowledge the truth about her mother and her mother's limitations. She protects herself against the pain of such knowing by deciding that it must be she who is bad, the mother who is good. In order to go on living, the child must deny the reality of what she really does on some level know to be the truth. Meanwhile, the defensively reinforced need for a good mother persists. Even as an adult, the patient brings to her relationships a desperate need to be known, understood, and loved in the ways that a perfect mother would love her young child. Ever hopeful, she looks to each new love object to offer her the kind of empathic attunement, emotional availability, and unconditional love that her mother should have been able to provide but did not. Okay? So in essence, to subsequent love relationships, the patient brings her illusions about what could be. She brings her infantile need for her objects to be other than who they are. She does not accept them as they are, but instead asks of them that they be who they are not, namely perfect mothers. These unrelentingly hopeful patients have never really mourned the mother's failure of them. Instead, they have spent a lifetime defending themselves against the pain of their grief by clinging to the hope that perhaps someday, right, like somehow, in some way, if they were but good enough and tried hard enough, they might yet be able to extract from a current object, a stand-in for the mother, the love they were denied early on. And so it is that the patient pursues her objects relentlessly, hoping against hope that perhaps this time, her relentless hope is the way she defends herself against the pain of her grief. Now, this article, the paragraphs that I just read to you, right, talks about a patient moving this relentless hope to other relationships in her life, other partnerships, friendships, etc. But the reason why I wanted to bring this in is because there's a way in which we may be continuing to bring this type of relentless hope, this unrelenting desire for our caregivers. It doesn't just have to be mom. I know the chapter talks about mom, but it could be any caregiver. We may still be doing this in our family systems to this day. So yes, there may be ways in which we have this relentless hope and we're moving it towards our partners, towards our children, right? That we will finally get from them what we never got from our predominant caregivers. But there is a way in which, for many of us, this may still be operating with our parents. We may now, even though we are adults, even though maybe we have seen how 40, 50, 60 years, like our parents are not changing, there still may be this relentless hope that if we are better, if we could finally be different, if we finally got our shit together, if we finally figured something out within us, if we were good enough, if we healed our worthiness wound, whatever it is, if we finally did the thing, then our parents would love us the way that we needed to be loved. And it's so heartbreaking the way in which the holiday season can illuminate this, because this is not the time for us to be grieving, right? This is the time for us to be happy. This is the time for us to be delighted that we're going to get to spend time with our families. And so how difficult and painful it is for us to now be continuing to grapple with the ways in which our family, our caregivers are not who we wanted them to be. There's almost this kind of surprise so often, like, what? What do you mean that my parents still, to this day, don't really listen to me or don't really see me for who I am or can't really accept the decisions I've made in my life? Like, what? You know, there's this kind of, sometimes this wild surprise that comes with relentless hope. And it is because relentless hope clouds our judgment. It clouds us from seeing reality. It's a way in which we are relating to our parents or to our loved ones from a lens of someone that they are not, all the while hoping that if we somehow do that, we'll extract from them, we'll get from them what we should have gotten and didn't get. And so if we are surprised, if year after year, we go home for the holidays, we are having a, gift exchange with our family members, and we are surprised by the disappointment. If we are feeling like we had hoped this year with enough, now that we have more financial security, now that we have a partner, now that we have kids, now our mother is going to treat us as equals, or now she's going to see how good of a, daughter we really are. Like, if we keep hoping that, odds are there's probably some relentless hope going on for you. And this is so understandable and so common. Relentless hope is, at one point, a really, important way that we tried to encounter the disappointment of our caregivers. But now, as adults, the problem with relentless hope is that we are then continuing to deny reality. We're continuing to try get something from people who cannot give it to us. Here it is again in the article. Relentlessly, she pursues her objects, unwilling/unable to confront the reality of their limitations. The patient neither accepts that things were then as they were in relation to the infantile object, nor accepts that things are now as they are. She wants desperately for things to have been different then and to be different now. Her hoping against hope is a desperate attempt to deny the reality of what was and is. I refer to such a defense as relentless entitlement or relentless hope because such a designation emphasizes the patient's unwillingness, perhaps inability, to bear the disappointment experienced in the face of the object's failure of her, right? The mother's failure of the child. And it arises in the context of the patient's refusal to grieve. And that is then why when we do find ourselves grieving or we're sad over the holidays, we then feel like there's something really wrong here. Well, it's not that there's something really wrong. It's that we have this relentless hope driving us to have some type of intimacy and type of connection that we can never get, because we can never get the type of intimacy we crave if we are not facing reality as it is. If we're not relating to our families in the way that they are, but rather relating to them as how we wish them to be, we will never experience the type of closeness we want. Maybe when we do this work, we'll find that we'll never be able to actually experience the type of closeness we want to our families. Or maybe by facing the disappointment and the ways in which our parents, our families can never be who we want them to be, maybe we create space for a different type of closeness. Yes? Either way, in order for us to get there, in order for us to relate to our caregivers, to our parents, to our families, as they are, the required piece of this is to mourn, is to grieve what we didn't get, and to grieve what we're still not getting. And it can be really hard to do this when we're also bombarded with messages from culture of how things should be and how our families should be. And we see on TikTok and on Reels and on YouTube all these videos of these people having these amazing holidays. And we think, I shouldn't be grieving. But I think it's actually really, really important to acknowledge the grief that is here and to face it fiercely. Because when we can face the grief, we're actually creating space to relate to our families in the way that they are. And that's hard to do. It's hard to do, especially hard to do in the holidays, especially hard to do alone. Getting support, getting help could be really, really helpful. But this is an important part of it. And I think if we were to be able to go into the holidays knowing that there's going to be grief, there's going to be disappointment, there's going to be encounters with difference that can feel sometimes really intolerable. If we went into it with the more open eyes to what is probably going to happen, I think we would be able to extend ourselves a whole lot more grace, a whole lot more compassion. And that's ultimately what we're needing here, right? Is the grace and compassion of encountering disappointment and difference. So one of the ways that I think could be really helpful for us to be more tender to ourselves as we're navigating the holiday season is to name your expectations. Now, this is something I talk about quite often on my podcast and on my Instagram and all of the places, is that I really struggle when people tout or kind of advocate for this idea of not having expectations as the answer to not experiencing disappointment. It's a very common idea, right? If you have any type of disappointment, it's because you had some sort of expectation. And the answer is to not have expectation. If you don't expect anything, then you can't be disappointed. And I think in some ways that makes sense, right? And I think there's some ways in which that's obviously true. If you don't expect anything, how can you be disappointed? But I think what that idea forgets or devalues is the ways in which we're going to have expectations, whether we are aware of them or not. So we may as well be aware of them so that we can anticipate them and then try to take care of ourselves. Rather than, I'm not going to have expectations. And what we're really doing when we're saying that is pushing our expectations to our unconscious, where then it has kind of the freedom to take over. And then we're going to experience disappointment anyway, because the expectations didn't go away. They're just driven unconsciously. Do we see that? Instead of doing that, what if we were to get ahead of it and name our expectations? What if we were to be more honest with ourselves about what we were expecting? There can be something really powerful about journaling or talking to your therapist and just naming it. Here are some fantasies I have for the holidays. This is some of my expectations. This is my hopes. This is my dreams. This is what I really want. I really want my mother to be this way. I really want my uncle to not say those really bigoted things. I really wish that my aunt would embrace my sexuality. It would mean so much to me if my dad were to finally say, I love you, right? Like, instead of being like, I'm not going to have any expectations, what if we were to bring to light our fantasies, our desires? And the more we bring it to light, the less power it ultimately has to ruining or running the show, to ruining our encounters when we realize that we're not going to get those things. There's something that's much more powerful about being able to say, I want my aunt to embrace my sexuality. Like, I have this really beautiful vision that I'm going to walk through the doors and she's going to embrace me and she's going to say, I love you no matter what. I'm so proud of you. You're so amazing. And I know that I have this dream, and yet I have also seen that my aunt will not be able to provide this. And so now I'm going to take some time to mourn and to be disappointed and to face the ways in which I relentlessly hope that my aunt will be different than she is. And that if I could just be different, then she could finally embrace me. And I'm going to really face this and name it and talk about it. Imagine how much more differently now we may then go and encounter our aunt, right? Now all that expectation, all that fantasy will have been spoken out loud. So now we can maybe create more space so that our aunt can relate to us in the way that she will. Maybe she won't embrace our sexuality, but maybe we'll have let go of some of the expectation or the need to simply by naming and acknowledging it. Right? Or maybe we will find ways to say to her, hey, I'm really disappointed. I really wish that you could embrace this thing for me or with me or, whatever. Maybe we'll find ourselves being able to say that and have more capacity to advocate for ourselves in this way. Once we have really named that this is something that we want, right? We have more options. We have more space to decide how we want to navigate things when we make it more available in our minds. Instead of, if we were like, I'm not going to go in with any expectations, and then we go in, we have this relentless hope, we have our unconscious that's driving, we find ourselves massively disappointed, and then we're confused as to why we're disappointed, right? Or we're confused why we're acting out. We're confused why we're suddenly yelling at our aunt at the dining room table. The more that we know ourselves, the more that we can name our fantasies, our dreams, our wishes, our desires, and bring them to light and then really interrogate them and think about them, the more we remove the drive, the unconscious wishes that are going to be running the show if we're not aware of them. Our unconscious has a lot of power over our decision making. And the ways in which it is unconscious, it's not like it's a place. It's just what isn't in mind, what we don't allow to be in our minds. What we push out of mind has a lot more power than what is in our mind. So bringing our unconscious conscious, being able to face and name our expectations removes some of its power. And by the way, it is okay to have expectations and fantasies and hopes. This is how our mind works. It's okay to have them. And two, it's okay to be disappointed. Like, that's also okay. Disappointment is a human emotion. It's an experience that we're allowed to have. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong about you or that your expectations were terrible if you find yourself disappointed. The more that we can maybe hold some of these things more consciously, maybe we won't ultimately feel as much disappointment or won't be as surprised by the disappointment. But that doesn't mean that we won't ever experience disappointment. Disappointment is a part of the game. It's a part of what it means to be in a relationship. And we can bear it. It is bearable. It is tolerable. We can do it. We can face it. We can hold it. And the more that we can hold disappointment, then the less power ultimately it has over driving our decisions and trying to avoid disappointment, which may avoid us encountering difference. And that moves into the kind of next part of this conversation, which is encountering difference. Family differences can feel really heightened during the holidays, can it? I mean, we become so much more aware of our difference in values, our difference in traditions and beliefs, our unresolved conflicts. We become so much more aware, like it becomes more important for us to remember in some ways our political and cultural differences, our generational divides. I mean, it all shows up, right? It all comes out. Differences on views on parenting, lifestyle choices. I mean, there's just so many ways in which difference shows up over the holidays. And encountering difference is hard when we have been taught that difference means there's something wrong. How many of us grew up in an environment where to be different, to have a different feeling, to have a different point of view was not tolerated? Maybe you were told this overtly. Don't say that. Don't tell people that about our family. Don't feel that way. That's the wrong way to feel. Maybe it was kind of like these overt messages. So there's ways in which maybe difference was denied overtly, but then there's also ways in which it was denied maybe covertly. Like, your passion about baseball, every time you talked about it, your parents would tune you out. Like, what happens when that happens on a consistent basis, right? We're told that our difference is that we have this different thing, this different hobby, this different idea, can't be held in the family dynamic, right? There's all sorts of ways in which we're told you can't see that, you can't believe that, you can't do that. Doing that threatens the family system in some way. And so if you were raised in that type of environment, which is a whole lot of us, right? What may happen is that we are then receiving the messages that difference is wrong and that the only way that we can be in connection with people is through similarity. Now, what's also hard about this is that this is very much in the cultural zeitgeist right now. How do we bear difference? How do we tolerate people having different political ideas, different value systems? Is that enough to cut somebody off? Is there enough of a relationship to not cut that off, to not cut them off because they have that difference? Like, how much difference can be tolerated? There's ways in which we sometimes feel that difference means something is unsafe, right? Like, we're not in a safe relationship. If there is some type of difference, there are ways in which we feel that because of somebody's political beliefs or political decisions that we are now not safe in their presence. And so it's very, very hard to navigate difference because a lot of us don't want to cut our families off, don't want to not have a relationship with them because of difference in value. And so if we're not cutting off the relationship, if we're deciding to stay in a relationship amidst difference, then we're going to have to know how to navigate difference. Not all differences are life and death. Not all differences means that you are not safe or that you are safe. Just because someone is the same as you does not mean that you're safe either. But these words are so tossed around. We use them so often that they sometimes lose meaning. And so then we don't have the tools or we don't have ways in which to figure out how to navigate these kinds of difficult conversations. If we're just going off of I'm either cutting them off if they're different, or I'm kind of relating to people like we have to be the same in order to be in relationship. We're in many ways denying ourselves a lot of really wonderful relationships that require in some way difference in order for it to thrive. Because I think so many of us have this fantasy that the only way we can be in relationship is if we're the same. But that's not really relating, is it? It's a form of enmeshment. It's a form of assumptions that our sameness means that we don't have to have conflict or we don't have to have difficult conversations. And Esther Perel talks about this in her book, Mating in Captivity, the ways in which difference, the ways in which encountering difference in other is actually critical to intimacy, to be able to hold that people have different ideas, they have different ways of thinking about things, they have different ways of navigating things is actually pivotal to intimacy, to a closeness that we're really wanting from our partners, from our families, our children, etc. So I know that it is tempting to perpetuate this idea that we were brought up in for many of us, right? That to be the same is the only way that we can be family, the only way we can be together. But I actually think a more generous and healthy, if I can use that word, way of relating is that difference is a really important part of relating. But we each have to figure out where our line is, because I'm not suggesting that we have to be relationship with everybody, or that some forms of difference, we have to figure out how to relate to. We each have to find our own capacities, our own tolerances. But in general, developing the skill set of encountering difference is going to go a lot further in developing the types of relationships you ultimately want than to cut people off the minute there is something difficult or different about them. So one of the ways that we can interrogate this idea of can we disagree and still be in relationship is to journal or talk about in therapy and think more within ourselves of why do certain conversations or certain differences feel more emotionally charged than others? Like what is it Is it the words that are used? Is it the beliefs that are being implied or suggested? Like, what emotionally charges us? What activates us? What is going on inside of ourselves? Because people can have all sorts of different beliefs. Some beliefs that maybe are even goes counter to us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are unsafe or that there's something being threatened. But if we are experiencing it as a threat, then we need to think about that a little bit more deeply so that we can more astutely determine if being in relationship with that individual is ultimately something that we want to do or not. I find, for me personally, that learning how to disagree while not turning the other person into a bad person is quite an advanced skill. It's so much easier, right? That the minute that somebody else disagrees with me, to want to turn them into a bad person. They're uneducated. They don't know what they're talking about. They're stupid. They're bad. Like we go there in our minds, and we may not be acting out on this. We may not be saying this out loud, but it's so seductive that because they're different, they must not know what they're talking about. Because I know what I'm talking about and I'm right and they're wrong. And there's this kind of othering and this bad and good and right and wrong that is so seductive for us to entertain, to fall into. And I think we do it again because we feel on some level that difference is intolerable. It's threatening. It's much harder for us in general to hold that both can exist, that difference is okay, that I don't have to convert people into what I believe, that people can believe something different and they can still be good people. I see this a lot in our political zeitgeist, how quickly we can move into, oh, you don't believe the same thing I do? That must mean that you're, an uneducated voter, or it must mean that you don't believe in my rights. It can really escalate into something really then black and white. And it's not to say that isn't sometimes true. But if we're always relating to all people and all difference that way, then there is something for us maybe to think about and to work through individually, like separately, like inside of ourselves. I think that the more we learn how to hold difference, I just see that way creates more space. It creates more relationships. It creates more, kind of ultimately, I think, like love, right? Like kindness. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to agree. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to kind of maintain some type of closeness to that person. But to be able to acknowledge that someone thinks differently than me, and it doesn't mean that they are bad or that I am righteous and right, is a really, really, I think, important skill for us to develop as we're learning how to navigate family dynamics. And so it's really important for us to learn this about ourselves, to know ourselves. Why does certain difference feel intolerable? Why does certain difference feel like it brings up a lot of contempt? How am I using contempt as a weapon to try to convince people to think differently? How am I using disgust? How am I turning against the other person in hopes that they will then change? Because it doesn't often work, right? Contempt, disgust, shutting people down, it doesn't work. I know this is a sensitive topic, and I know that it is very seductive for us to be very reductive about difference and to turn away because of difference or because of conflict. But I really think that when we are facing the holidays, when we are trying so hard to stay in relationship with people who we care about, that knowing how to hold difference is going to make such a difference in our holiday experience, in our family experience in general. But I think all of this can be made so much harder when our worth is on the line, when we feel the need in some ways to interpret difference, whether it's difference of opinions or values or behaviors, as personal and as threatening to our sense of self. If we feel like our sense of self is very shaky and we feel like we are constantly evaluating ourselves based on whether we are good enough or there's something fundamentally flawed within us, then of course we are going to be then hyper vigilant about perceived rejection, criticism, or disconnect, right? Which then can make navigating difference all the more overwhelming, destabilizing, and even painful. And this is a way in which my ebook, Reclaiming Worth, could be helpful if we want to think about the worthiness wound a little bit more deeply. But there are some ways in which the worthiness wound complicates navigating difference that I want to break down for you. One, like I said, oftentimes differences can feel like a personal rejection if we are struggling with the worthiness wound. The difference can trigger up fear that we're being judged, that we're being dismissed and not being accepted. Like if someone disagrees with us, we may feel like they are invalidating like who we are and our right to exist rather than simply holding a different perspective, right? And so, a conflict of values or of opinion can lead us to thinking something like, they don't respect me, or this means that I'm not good enough, right? This means something of myself. So we take a difference and attack. What we're doing there is we're taking a difference, we're interpreting it from the worthiness wound that tells us that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. And then we are internalizing it as like, that is what they are saying. They're saying something that I don't agree with. I am taking it to mean that they are attacking me. And so instead of seeing differences as neutral or as a natural consequence of relating, it can feel really then personal. And then we feel the need to defend ourselves or to attack. It's amazing at how much we feel like we can justify doing really, really cruel and mean things because we feel like it's being done onto us. But it may not be, that's not what may be happening. But because we're filtering everything from the lens of there's something really wrong with me, and we're so then hypervigilant to attack and critique, that somebody may say something, we interpret it as an attack, and then we feel then justified to attack back. Okay. Another way that the worthiness wound kind of can drive our inability to navigate difference is because oftentimes our need for approval, especially if we have this relentless hope, right? Especially if we keep fantasizing that our family is finally going to approve of our decision and they're finally going to get us and they're finally going to love us the way we want to be loved. If we're feeling that way, we're going to try to prove our value. And so we can people please. Right? That's a big way that this comes out. We're trying so desperately to be liked, to be approved, that we deny difference. We act like we're not different. We act like everything is fine, that we agree with what the person is saying because we don't want to face conflict, or we don't feel worthy of having our difference in opinion, or we feel like if we don't get approval in a very specific way, then we're going to face rejection. And so again, the worthiness wound is telling us like, be hypervigilant for critique, for rejection, for abandonment, deny difference either by attacking the other person and trying to get them to change, or attacking ourselves and people pleasing and trying to avoid conflict. All the while there is difference that we're not facing, we're not sitting with, we're not acknowledging within ourselves or within the other. And so we can turn the other person as bad, or we turn us as bad. Either way, we're trying to deny difference and trying to make everything be okay. And then we're not really relating to our family member, to other people, with a more accurate perspective. Yes. So then, of course, there's the too muchness, right? Of course, we cannot talk about family and we cannot talk about the holidays and navigating difference without this opposite side of the worthiness wound, which is a sense of feeling too much. If I state my opinion, they're going to think that I am too much, or I'm too opinionated, I'm too difficult. If I don't speak up, if I speak up, then they're going to see that that I am in fact too messy, too complicated. But then there's also the flip side of that, which is really hard thing about the worthiness wound, which is the tug of war. The opposite side of that is if I don't speak up, then I'm invisible. And they won't think I matter. And I don't matter. And so we oscillate between these two. Do I speak up? Do I not speak up? Do I be invisible, or do I advocate for myself? And if I advocate for myself, then I am too much. But if I don't advocate for myself, then I am too little. And it can be really, really challenging for us to face family dynamics earnestly when all of this is going on. And so, of course, we may move into shame, right? Like, I'm wrong for feeling this way. I shouldn't feel this way. This shouldn't be this hard. I also think we can move into like, they'll never understand me because there's something really wrong with me. Like, I'm very difficult to understand. This happens so often in my treatment room, right? People come to me and they really feel the sense of, I must be so hard to understand. Because if I were easy to understand, I would have been understood. So the reason why I'm not understood is because I'm actually very hard to understand. And that can be really devastating. Again, another form of relentless hope. Like, there's something bad within me because they could understand me if I made myself more understandable, rather than maybe they couldn't understand you because of their own limitations. And so when we address the worthiness wound, and when we learn how to encounter difference, and we learn how to hold our expectations with a little bit more grace, what we find is that we can hold our boundaries a little bit more firmly. We can find our limits and communicate those limits with a little bit more honesty, a little bit more earnestly. We can see difference more neutrally. Like, not all difference requires conflict or an escalation. Right? We can be a little bit more discerning about when difference does require some kind of escalation or some kind of self-advocacy. We may be able to navigate difficult conversations with more emotional regulation or kind of relational clarity. And this is really advanced skill sets. Relational competence is a whole thing. And it's so intertwined with healing the worthiness wound. And so I wanted to wrap it up by just giving some ideas of things that we could say as we're navigating difference in our families. We could, practice listening and saying something like, tell me more about that. Kind of trying to be more curious about people's perspectives rather than like debating, or rather than shutting down, or rather than assuming or escalating. This is hard, right? We can look for areas of common ground. And it's not as a way to try to deny difference, but as a way of understanding that difference may not be changed, right? Like, we may be very, very different, but there may be some things that we share. And when we can hold that the sharing comes with the difference, then we're now really relating, as opposed to trying to override the difference. Yes. Maybe we can practice stepping away when something starts to get really, really escalated, like knowing when to disengage. We can say something like, I see things differently, right? But I appreciate your sharing your thoughts. We can say something like, I need a quick break. I need a break from this. Or I feel really complete with this. Like, I just don't want to keep talking about this. Can we focus on something else? Can we, let's focus on enjoying the time that we have together today. I don't think we're going to see eye to eye to this. So let's not kind of continue talking about this. Like, we don't have to get into debate whenever we notice there's difference. There can be a mutual acceptance of can we be different? And can we find things that we actually enjoy talking about, right? Saying something like, that's an interesting perspective. Can we revisit it another time? That's something we could say, right? Can we talk about this later, right? Let's focus on being together, and we can talk about politics, or we can talk about our religious differences maybe another time. I really like the taking the break. I really encourage taking breaks. If you need a break, take the break. There is a lot to be said about giving yourself that permission, especially if you're staying at home, staying with your family, and you don't maybe have the freedom to leave whenever you want, taking walks, going to a bedroom or bathroom and giving yourself some TikTok time. Could be a way that you're kind of self-regulating and you're managing your experience, your emotions a little bit. Managing or tending is another way of saying that. Let's see, what else? I think that's all the notes that I have for us. I hope that this was somewhat helpful. I'm feeling like maybe that was a little bit more scattered than I had hoped. But what I really wanted to bring to you all was, one, this idea of relentless hope and the importance of grief and mourning, and that may be here and that is okay, right? To be able to name our expectations instead of trying to deny them in an effort to not feel disappointment. And And also disappointment is communication for us about maybe where there was some type of denial, relentless hope, or maybe just part of being human, right? And then I also wanted to kind of get into this idea of encountering difference and the importance of difference, that difference can exist. And that doesn't mean that something is wrong. But it is knowing how to navigate difference, how to relate in the midst of difference that can really set the tone for family. And I think the tendency a lot of times when we get together with family is to fall into the typical role, which brings into this idea of like family systems, right? That like maybe we're the caregivers or maybe we're the peacemakers. Like it's so seductive for us to fall into familiar roles. And to give ourselves a lot of grace if we find ourselves falling into those similar patterns, because there's ways in which the family system has operated because of the role that you played. And changing roles in families is one of the hardest things that we can do. There's a story I heard a long time ago about like a guy who went to a meditation retreat and was, found himself kind of enlightened, and he was there for years in a cave, meditating and doing all these things and, kind of finding enlightenment. And the masters were like, "You're ready to go home now." And then he went home to a family reunion and all this shit came back up. I'm sure the story was better told when I heard it 10 years ago, but the point of the story is that like, it's one thing to feel enlightened or healed or whatever. And it's another to go back into your family system, to go back to family. Like I said at the beginning, it can really lead to a lot of regression or a lot of feelings that we didn't have access to because we weren't in that scenario, in that circumstance, and that is now coming up. And that happens, and that's okay. That's part of the experience too. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong. Regression happens when we go back into family systems. And so giving yourself a lot of grace, a lot of breaks can be really, really helpful. And let me think if there's any final notes. And of course, this all can be so much harder when our worth is always on the line. And so tending to the worthiness wound, getting the right type of support to help you hold yourself, can be really, really important as we're navigating the holidays and our family and expectations and all of the things that get aroused and arise within us as a result of coming in with family. Okay, so hopefully this was useful to all of you. Thank you for being here. Let me see, final notes. Reminder, my year in review is available for download. Go grab that. It'll be available till I think the first week in January. I hope you join us for book club or join us for the writing group. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, you're more than welcome to reach out. Come connect with me on Instagram at I am Thaís Sky. Thank you for being here, and I will catch you next time.